My players are currently faced with a problem. In front of them is Aldania Petal-Feet, a plant witch whose children she just murdered, or they just murdered, not very long ago. They can't leave. They can't run. They must address her and hope things go well. Luckily for them, she seems to be very nice about it. She very quickly realizes that these strangers are here not because they came for her blessing or needed something from her, as most strangers would. Instead, they came here because they were dragged by her children. And she knows that they're probably injured. Her children, that is. So, she quickly asked Robert Redface, the grandfather Redbeat, and one of her children as well, where the injured kids are. Quickly, they're brought in. One is brought in that is very badly wounded. It is the last, well, it's virtually the last one that survived the original fight. The last Vegetan who dragged Hawkins all the way back to the grove, who was standing on 2 HP. The other one was the one Stavros, last session, bashed its head in when I tried to play with him. Now, one is severely wounded while the other one's not as severely wounded. But this is where my players learn of a disease that affects these plant creatures. Now, in the real world, fresh food, such as vegetables and fruits, they start to mold. They go bad, they turn moldy, they turn yucky, and they rot away. Now, for the vegetans, the same thing applies. Whenever they're wounded, they start to get infected with something Aldania tells the party. It's what she calls the moldening. It is a disease that happens, or can happen, to any vegetan who is basically wounded. She tells them that a simple wound, a simple scratch, could be fatal. You see, for them, as soon as their skin's exposed, they can catch the moldening, and there's no cure. Aldania Petal-Feet has been here working on trying to find a cure. That is what she does here. And well, very quickly she patches up the one that Stavros hit on the head. Thankfully, its wounds hadn't progressed far enough to warrant its death. She managed to patch that one up and save its life. However, the other one had several bullet holes in it, some marks from swords, hammers, and the moldening was quickly spreading around it. Though, Aldania, being a parent who loves her children, played it off as if it wasn't too bad, to make sure the vegetan in front of her didn't realize it was going to die. Quickly after this, the party realizes, as they're invited to this, that there's a special ceremony for when this happens. It is called the knighting. Very typical, not very unique, but whenever a vegetan is to die to the moldening, they are to be knighted, supposedly. So Aldania offers for them to join, and they accept. So everyone goes outside of her house. A fire is set up with a bunch of logs. All the vegetans, about 20 of them, come up. Robert Redface and Tiny Plant show up, and the party sits down around this fire. There, Aldania firstly speaks about the fallen vegetans who brought the friends to the grove. She didn't say they died. She didn't say anything like that. And she also used the terminology that they brought the friends, aka the party, to the grove. Not that they fought to the death against them and lost, but managed to bring one of them back. Instead, she makes it seem as if everything's alright, as if it's fine. And she goes on to say how their bodies will end up feeding Orbitus, the planet Orbitus, so more of their brethren can be born later. So their death isn't a death. They simply return back to Mother Orbitus, to be reused, to be reborn. From this, she goes in to talk about the vegetan who is gravely wounded and is to die. She brings him up before her and says to all the other vegetans, "This vegetan has done a great deed. He brought our friends here by himself. You are going to be knighted by me. Do you accept?" Of course, the vegetan accepts. All the other vegetans are cheering. So Aldania pulls out a stick, a literal stick, and such as you would do with a sword, she knights the vegetan in front of her, and says, "You've done a great deed. I expect great things from you. Please, Go on to the other world. Protect our brothers and sisters who are no longer with us. That is your mission. That is your goal. Go protect them. You're a strong warrior, and I believe in you." And as she says that, she finishes knighting him. And she leans down, kisses him on the forehead. He crumbles away into a bunch of mold, his body disintegrating. To this, all the vegetarians cheer. Even though the party obviously knows that the veteran's dead. Aldania knows the veteran's dead. But they cheer. They know this as a good thing. Afterwards, Aldania does start humming a sad song, a melancholic song that everyone joins in with. All the vegetarians. Hum this simple song that shows the emotion of melancholy, of sadness, of yearning, but none of them are truly sad. The party also joins in, some more begrudgingly than the others, as they all link arms and hum this sad tune, a simple tune on repeat for a couple minutes to honor the passing of the fallen children and the knighting of the heroic vegetan. Soon afterwards, Aldania Petal-Feet can be seen exiting. She says she's going to go inside and she would like to talk to the party afterwards. It's very obvious to see most of the party has a good enough passive perception to notice that as she walks by, a few tears hit the ground by her feet. Though she has a strong face, she is deeply saddened by the death of her children. She goes inside to do whatever she does, while they stay outside and they talk to Sir Rappa Redface. He is virtually the protector of this place. At first, he seems very melancholic and sad himself until he realizes he's holding a tiny plant in his hands, and he quickly changes the subject, seeing that she's getting sad. He's very clearly a guardian, a grandfather to her, and doesn't want anyone to feel bad because of him. He starts out by asking the party what they're doing, who they are, where they come from, what do they do for hobbies, He's trying to make small talk. They talk for a while, they learn things. It ends up being mostly about them learning about him and Aldania, even though he initially planned for him to learn about them. So I suppose the party managed to turn it around on him. They learn from him a lot of things. They learn that Aldania used to have another daughter that she hasn't seen in 10 years, hasn't came back and talked to her. She hasn't properly smiled since then. She learns that Aldania used to be a human, and is a human, and once was in a city until she was virtually ran out for being a witch. She experimented on herself instead of other humans whenever she was attempting to find ways to make her plant children more humanoid so they could blend in with the society of the Republic of Cordoi. They learn other things about her. They learn that Sir Robert Redface was her first ever creation, and a miracle that he's still alive. They learn things that the vegetarians came next, and they physically cannot evolve past that of children. They learn that recently Tiny Plant has been made, her second daughter, as another attempt to make a humanoid plant. And under all of this, the party catches, and they have been catching, at least the ones who are more perceptive or insightful. They've been noticing there's something weird about Sir Robert Redface. Every time the molding is brought up, he always looks away, or he averts his gaze, or he fidgets. Every time the molding is brought up by Aldania, there's always some kind of strange, adverse reaction he has. And a few of the party members are caught up on it, making them very suspicious of him. They believe he's holding some kind of secret. Not to mention they're very suspicious of Aldania as well. They don't trust them. Now, I think this is funny because as a dungeon master, I'm literally, I know how they are. I know that they're actually half decent people. So it's funny to me when I try and throw the party nice NPCs, but they're super sketch of them. Which, to be fair, it's a good thing. I'm glad they're sketch of them because they could be bad. They don't know. But I do think it's kind of ironic that whenever I try to make people seem very nice and loving and opening, basically opening these characters up, that they're super suspicious of them, which it might be because of how nice they are. I don't know. But they seem to see that something strange with Rappa. About this time, Hawkins has actually also has made eye contact with Tiny Plant, and they've been having this awful staring contest for ages. Until eventually Stavros gets in the way of Hawkins, making Tiny Plant win by default, and giving him a mocking face. That's dealing with my microphone there. Ooh. But after a while, they talk. They meet the Vegetans. The Vegetans run off. So Robert Redface tells them, I need to go put the Vegetans to sleep, more or less, because they're afraid of the dark, and they like being tucked in their children, more or less. They have to be handled in certain ways. So he gives Tiny Plant to Kira, the Wood Elf, which this is where a few things are weird to me. I made Tiny Plant with the expectation that the players would like her. She's this little tiny cute plant who only makes humming noises, is kind of like a child, super curious about everything. But ironically, Kira and the player behind Kira, Mo5, absolutely hates Tiny Plant. I think he mentioned something about not liking children, so I think the idea that she's like a child really irritated him, like as a character. And whenever I had Rappa hand Tiny Plant to Kira, that was the plan from the beginning. Before I even knew Kira or Mo5 didn't like Tiny Plant, that was the plan for him to hand Tiny Plant to her. For a few moments there, I was seriously scared that Kira was about to drop a Tiny Plant into the campfire nearby. Now that would have... I can't even imagine what would have happened. I know what would have happened. Tiny Plant would have most likely died. And then at that point, the party members would have died right after them. Right after her. Yeah, that's probably what would have happened. So I was very thankful that they didn't do that to Tiny Plant. Speaking of which, Stavros, played by Shmeeb, throughout the prior week, kept making jokes to me. It's like, man, I'm going to freaking Ozzy Osbourne Tiny Plant. I'm going to rip her head off and eat her. Because something you may not know, Stavros has this cursed armor. For one of his obligations, he started with this cursed armor he got from his patron. And the cursed armor every now and then tells him to do things. Last session, he had to make a charisma check to see if he could get out of the armor, and he rolled a nat 1. So in that nat 1, the armor basically told him, this was during the fight with the Vegetans, the armor told him, eat one of the Vegetans. But he didn't eat one of the Vegetans. So the armor has a will of its own. So Stavros thought, maybe I should eat Tiny Plant, because Tiny Plant is the weakest, it'd be the easiest to eat, and it might satisfy the armor. So I was also worried that Stavros was going to do something. Thankfully, I was wrong. Because soon after that, they go inside. When Rappa runs off, they go inside. They see Aldania Petal-Feet again. Aldania Petal-Feet is now working on medicines. She tells them that she's working on ways to try and find the cure for the mold onion, more or less. And this is where they learn about the frogmen. Because she tells them then, the frogmen are always around croaking. They won't leave me alone. They're croaking. They're making noise. And I can't work. There's been times where I'm about to do something and then they croak and then I drop a potion. And she tells them of all these problems that are being caused because of these frogmen coming around her grove and croaking. So she brings that up. She also then tells them that she wants to talk about what happened to her children. Now, she's very reasonable about it. She tells them, I understand why you fought and killed my children. It is partially their fault. They tried to capture you. It made sense why you did this. However, she says to them, I'm sure you've all had your own mothers. I'm sure you understand. Even though I understand why it happened to my children, and they come and go, and it's not rare for them to die, I can't just let it slide. I can't just ignore the fact and say it's all right that you killed my children. So I'd like to ask a favor of you. And she goes on to ask them to go travel to the frogmen. Ask them why they keep sending people to croak and bother her at her grove, and find a way to stop them. In return, she would completely forgive them for what happened to her children, and she would also supply them with information, supplies, knowledge, a place to stay, potions if they have anything, and just anything they want. She would give it to them if she could. So all in all, this sounds like a really good deal for them. But they didn't really want to do it at first. And at this point, they were still kind of on edge of wanting to stay or leave, but after the entire campfire scene and seeing how emotional everyone was, they decided they were going to stay the night here. They didn't decide they were going to leave off of the night because they didn't trust anyone. So there was this sense of trust starting to form. So they talked to Aldania some more, and they talked more about what she wants and more about these frogmen. And they asked about what's going on, who started the fight, and things like that. But no one really knows who started the fight. It's just kind of devolved into this. And there's rumors that the frogmen like to eat the vegetans and all kinds of stuff that they hear about. They eventually decide to accept her quest. And they continue to talk to her. They say they'll do that. But Stavros, who really likes information, asked if he could have a book or some information beforehand. So she says yes. What would you like to know about? And he basically asked for a book on any of the religions, the churches. And she has a book on Orbitus, the Orbitus Triumphant, because she believes in Orbitus more so than she believes in the rings that circle Orbitus. So she gives him this book. And Stavros, doing something I completely did not expect, actually sits down and starts teaching Tiny Plant. He tries to read. He reads this book out loud to Tiny Plant, tries to teach her. Now, this was inspired by the fact that Aldania thanked them and asked them to please give attention to Tiny Plant, play with her, do whatever, just talk to her, because there's something that all the vegetans lack, and that's human interaction. None of them can go to cities without being persecuted, without being captured, killed, turned into slaves. And not many people ever come out here who aren't bad. So this is the first time Tiny Plant has human interaction. And Aldania thinks that this human interaction might be the key into making her, whenever she grows, into more of a human than a plant. That's something that she didn't do with her first daughter. So Stavros is doing this with her. And more questions are asked about the frogmen, and more suspicions are going on. And Kira has noticed a hatch in the room that she's very curious about, going to see what's down there. But throughout the night, no one messes with the hatch, which is probably for the best, at least without asking. And Aldania says she's going to stay up all night doing this, working since it's the first time she's at peace in a long time. About the same time, though, or earlier in their experience, Aldania pulled out a newt in a jar. And of course, Newt, who has this obligation to protect other salamanders and such, was totally against it. He tried to take it from her, and she's like, "What are you doing? Why are you trying to take this from me?" And it was explained that, she would let him go free if Newt would give her some of his saliva, because she was going to use that salamander as saliva's ingredients in potions. So he does. And throughout this, she brings up the term that is very dear to him. She brings up the term pterogenesis. Supposedly, she has found these ancient documents or this information, and she's been using it to help her try and find a proper way to make her children better. Now, pterogenesis is the same way that Newt was created, from a salamander into a humanoid. And he happens to have some of these papers on him that he stole before he ran from Tectonia, a place way across the ocean where researchers do all kinds of stuff, and there's wizards and researchers. It's crazy stuff. So he hears this word pterogenesis, and it's one of the main things he's looking for. But the problem is, he doesn't want to bring it up easily, because he's worried that if he gives her these papers, she's going to kill all of them and do something evil with it, because he's under the assumption that she'll be too powerful if she gets all this information. But they come to some kind of agreement that they'll talk about it. And they both realize they both know things. She seems very interested in this, and they incite her, but she doesn't seem very suspicious about it. But the players are very, very suspect of everything going on. But that happens. They kind of ignore it. It's fine. It's whatever. And they all go to their own thing. They go outside. They sleep. Stavros stays up for a few hours in the room, teaching Tiny Plant until she sleeps. Then he goes outside and lays down too. Now, in the middle of the night, Kira, the wood elf, hears a noise. She meditates, so it doesn't bother her too much right away. It's just noise outside. But then it is enough to bother her, and she decides to open her eyes, breaking her meditation, and see what it is. There's something in her bag. She looks in her bag, and she realizes it's Tiny Plant. Tiny Plant is inside of her bag, digging around looking for stuff. And Tiny Plant has actually got a hold of the 2 maps given to them by Chronos The Shamed. The large map of Orbitus and the large map of the region, well, basically the entire region contained in the Republic of Trodoy. And she seems to be very interested. She's looking at these, pointing at them. It seems very entertaining to the idea of traveling. So weirdly enough, Kira sees her in her bag, and I was also worried about this. I didn't know how Kira was going to react, because no one knows Tiny Plant snuck out here. Aldania doesn't know Tiny Plant's out here. So I was like, I don't know what Kira's going to do. And Kira asked Tiny Plant, do you want to go on an adventure with us? And Tiny Plant probably would have said yes. I don't know if Kira asked that with good intentions or bad intentions. But Tiny Plant probably would have said yes. But at that same time, Kira in her head hears the sounds of a giant hammer smashing into a burning tree that haunts her memories. The sound of Herodotus hammering down the world tree that she accidentally set on fire. This is always the first greeting to a message that is sent to her via sending, usually by her brother. Over the last 7 years, she's been running from the elves. She caused a huge fire, and now she's being hunted down by the elves to be captured and have her horns, her antlers, cut off as punishment. And her brother is one of them. Her brother every now and then sends her messages via a sending spell. Only 25 words, but it's usually along the lines of, come back, you can be forgiven, we're going to find you, I'll kill you. And progressively got worse. But she's been managing to hide from them. But today she gets a message from him that says, Sister, 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 it's all right. I'll forgive you. You should just come back. You'll be forgiven in death. It'll be all right. And then it pauses for a while before it continues. The last sentence is haunting for Kira. It says, Trodoy sure is a nice place, isn't it? It sure is so nice, isn't it? My dear, dear, disgusting sister. What that line means for Kira, it means that the elves have finally got onto her trail. They realize she's in Trodoy. That means they will be appearing in her life to try and capture her at some point. It's a warning sign. A sign that her past is coming to haunt her. It's coming to catch up to her. With this, she ushers Tiny Plant back inside without talking anymore. And she goes back to bed. In the morning, everyone wakes up to having the Vegetans jump on them. Besides Kira. Kira cannot sleep. They wake up to the Vegetans jumping on them. It's a nice, playful day. When they wake up, Hawkins quickly stands up and attempts to gather all the Vegetans, which he does pretty easily. All the Vegetans stand up, follow him. And I'm not sure what prompted this. I think because of how weak they are, and the fact that he's a strategist and knows that they are up against the Frogmen. He decides to try and teach them about strategy and warfare, and how to make proper weapons. He orders all of them to take off the soft ball top at the top of their spear, assuming that it covers the point, but he quickly realizes that when they take it off, it's just a piece of stick. Although their weaponry is built to capture, not to kill. So he quickly changes that. He grabs a rock and a knife and teaches them how to sharpen the edge of the stick. He's teaching them how to make weapons that kill, not weapons that capture. The Vegetans, unlike Tiny Plant, aren't very good learners. They kind of do it, but it's not very good, and they often get distracted, run around, play, making it quite a hassle for Hawkins, and then Kira, and most of the party come around and get involved in this. And it becomes a huge hassle. It's very apparent quickly that the Vegetans, they only have the mindset of a child. They get distracted. They're very hard to train. It's not going anywhere. But then, Sir Robert Redface comes out with Tiny Plant, and kind of sees what's going on, and gives him a heads up on it, like it's a good idea, kind of. But it's still not working, no matter who tries. But then they witness beside them for the first time how a vegeton is born. Out of the ground pops a vegeton from one of these plants that the other vegetons tend to with water buckets. It pops up and is born, a fresh vegeton to the world. As soon as the party sees this, they grab him. They grab him and they instantly show him how to make a weapon. Now this vegeton has just been born. He doesn't know what's going on. He's confused. But he's following what's basically being shown to him. He's sharpening the stick, and it's all right. It's not bad. Because he can make a decent stick, Hawkins, played by Swills, he names him Vegeta. Or it's Vegeta. It's not Vegeta, it's Vegeta. It's a play on words for Vegeta and Vegeton. Vegeta. So Vegeta is now out of nowhere. Literally, this guy was just born. He is now a named creature because the players named him. So the players already have a connection to him. And then they draw a face on him. Kit pulls out his disguise kit and draws a face on him. All the other Vegetons want to get a face as well, but he doesn't allow them. And very quickly, Aldania comes outside, realizes what's going on, and puts a stop to it. It turns out that whenever a Vegeton is first born, that they are very susceptible to diseases, and they need to wait a week under her care to make sure their skin and everything forms properly, so they won't be infected. So she tells them no. Whenever they ask if he can come with them on their adventure, she says no, he was just born. He needs to sit inside, so he can easily be infected right now. And then she points out to Kit, you've literally drawn on his face. That right there could lead to an infection and be the death of him. You could have just killed him. He's not going on an adventure with you. As she takes him away and doesn't allow them to take him. So now they have potentially killed another one. They're not sure. But Aldania goes past it. And Aldania comes out with everyone. And they're soon to basically send the party off on their adventure. Tiny Plant has actually made the group a bunch of these little bracelets. She made certain bracelets for each of them. I believe the colors went like this. Newt got a bracelet of green flowers. Kira got a bracelet of white flowers. Hawkins got a bracelet of red flowers. Then Stavros got a bracelet of yellow flowers. And then Kit got a bracelet of red flowers. Or it might be vice versa for Kit and Hawkins, I'm not sure. But she gave them these flowers as parting gift. And then Aldania and Sir Rappa basically asked the party, is there anything you need before you go on your adventure? Do you need to know anything? Do you need supplies? Unfortunately, they did ask for some supplies, but Aldania didn't really have much to offer because she hasn't been to a city in years. They've lived out here in this grove for over 9 years. They have not been to a city anytime soon. They don't have the proper supplies for them. But they don't say anything. Now, this is where the issue comes in. I gave them a quest on the side, like a side quest, basically about finding information about things. And one of the boxes to check off was, understand the dangers of the swamp. So I was like, all right, they're going to see this quest on the side. I've already told them about it. They're going to see this quest and be like, all right, we need to check that box off. Let's ask about what else we should worry about out here in the swamps. But no. They said, we're good to go. So I was like, uh-oh, that's not good. So then I get Sir Rapidash. Sir Rabbit, that's a Pokemon. Sir Rappa Redface. Whoops. To basically inquire with them 2 or 3 more times, are you sure there's nothing else you need? There's nothing you need to know. Like, I was trying to push it out of them, but no, they just would not. So, they decided to go off into the swamp without the proper information they needed. And I couldn't force it upon them because, that's the people there, they didn't tell them and the party didn't inquire, so they didn't know. So they march off into the swamps where Stavros actually gets a message from an old friend of his, this Aarakocra named Cleek. He doesn't share the contents with the party, but is just as useless. Cleek has a bad habit of sending him absolutely useless messages all the time. So basically just it's a random letter as they're traveling. Soon after that, they see a statue in the distance with a light on it. They slow down before they get to it, and they start talking about what to do. They decide we're going to they tried to force Kit to disguise as a frogman and croak. Kit wasn't having any of it, though, and he was backing away, obviously not part of this. This happened on for a while, and them trying to force Chit to do this, until eventually Newt got bored. So Newt just left the party, not even sneaking, just went up across the bridge, across the other bridge, went and looked at the statue. And Newt will be the only one who saw a statue. The statue was that of a giant frogman fighting a giant snake that had a humanoid face. And they're fighting each other to the death, which was kind of a warning sign for the battle that was about to happen. But due to no one else finding interest in it or going near it, no one had the proper history check. Newt made a history check, but he didn't have enough. No one had a proper history check to be able to inquire about what was about to happen. And they also didn't ask before they left about the dangers. So this is now 2 missed good opportunities because of what they were doing, which is fine. It doesn't hurt me. It just hurts them. So then Newt comes back, and they all go forward, and they're hopping around. Newt's hopping around like a frog, ribbiting, acting crazy, and they walked straight into an ambush. All around this entire island are a bunch of bullywuds waiting and laying in action. And as soon as Newt crosses that bridge, 2 of them jump up, attack him, and all these bullywuds are raised from the water that they're hiding in and swarm. They're all submerged, so they couldn't be seen. They're waiting for the keywords from the ones who are in this tall grass on the other side of the island. So now the party's in a fight. And it would have been a nastier fight. Actually, it was really nasty, don't get me wrong. But they start fighting, just typical stuff. And there is this one bullywug archer. I just have to mention it, because this is the power of allowing the dice to help tell your story. There's this one bullywug archer who was shooting across line. He was actually in pretty good positioning where he wasn't shooting through anyone, so he didn't have to worry about that. But he was shooting, and 3 rounds in a row, he rolled nat ones. So 3 rounds in a row, he shot his own friends in the back of the heads. So that basically, and the worst part will be is he, this is a bit of a spoiler, blah, blah, blah. He is one of the only survivors of this entire encounter. So he's now being deemed frog killer. He's now going to become a named frog who has a bad reputation. So basically, just due to dice, I have a new NPC that the players know. Because this random no-name NPC accidentally just kept shooting his own friends in the back or missing. So that was something that happened, which helped the party even the odds. And there was a very important role I made. Sometimes it's very easy to make your players feel like you're railroading them or something similar. But so I made this very important role at the start of the combat. It's a 1d6 out in public. I rolled a 5. Now what that meant is there was a chance for this really bad guy named Sothis to show up. And he would show up whenever that was the turn counter. So in 5 turns he would show up. And halfway through 5 turns, a bunch of snakes would show up and start fighting the bullywuds. So basically that was the death counter, which they didn't know what it meant, but I knew what it meant. And if Sothis shows up, they're not getting away. So they're fighting these frauds, it's doing whatever, and then unfortunately an arrow takes Kira down. Kira goes unconscious, and Kira's the healer. No one else can heal Kira. Next, the only person with a health potion is Newt. Newt's pretty close, but then out of nowhere, that same turn, that's when the snakes attack. So the snakes attack the bullywuds, which are basically being cleaned up now. They've been cleaned up, they've already been defeated, they've been cleaned up. A giant constrictor and 2 smaller snakes come out. One grapples Newt. The other one start fighting the frauds. Now, this is a problem because Kira is on death saves, and Newt is grappled, and Newt, for the love of God, throughout the next few turns, cannot get out of this grapple for the life of him. He's doing super unlucky. Now, the thing about death saves I do in my game is I like the fact that no one knows when someone's going to die, so there's a sense of urgency. Death saves are private. So Kira, on their turn, is rolling me private death saves, and they fail all 3 of their death saves in a row before anyone could get to them. Actually, that same turn, Stavros gets to them and tries to lay on hands since it's a paladin, but it doesn't work. Now, there's a problem. As soon as the snakes show up, there's also a patrol of frauds that show up, led by Krokel. Krokel is the same fraud they met last session who tried to warn them to run. This time, Krokl shows up with this squad of frauds, and he sees them, and he sees what's going on. And at first, the party's like, oh no, we're screwed now. But then they see him doing the same motion he was doing last time, except opposite. Now he's doing a motion like this, telling them to come, like telling them to run, and he looks terrified. He looks terrified. And I was trying desperately to let the players know, okay, so they already knew that the first time the Fawnde did this, he was trying to tell them to run. So he's doing it the opposite way. That must mean he's trying to tell us to come on, and he looks terrified. Something bad must be happening. The party does kind of get the memo and they start running. But the problem is it's 2 turns till Sothis shows up. And if they're not off the map, they won't get away. So the problem is, as they're running, it's 1 turn till Sothis gets there. They've all cleaned everything up. They're running away. They're about to cross the bridge where Krokl is waiting for them. And they get to this bridge and they cross. But the problem is Stavros, who's picked up Kira, realizes Kira's not breathing. So I tell him this. They happen to have a Revivify scroll on them that they were gifted by Alomi, the grand strategist of Twilight Redemption. So they have this. So I tell Stavros, you can tell Kira's not breathing. You also know something really scary is coming. So either you need to keep running so this thing does not catch up to you and you can escape, and you're basically going to go over the time limit to use Revivify, or you need to stop here right now, use Revivify, and be prepared to face whatever comes your way. And it was a good choice, which I think they would have chose this anyway. But at the same time, Kit, who was last, or one of the wizards who was last, is running across the bridge. But he didn't have enough urgency, he didn't run far enough or fast enough, and the giant constrictor snake catches him and grapples him. So now Kit, 1 turn away from Sothis showing up, is also grappled. So the party decides, we're going to stay here. We're going to revive Kira, and we're going to get Kit out. Kit manages to break the grapple, get across the bridge. Kira is revived. The problem is, the timer's up. Sothis, the Everborn, swimming through the water. Humanoids. How long has it been? I should test how strong you are. A giant, red and black, Naga, spirit Naga, swims through the water towards them. They can no longer run. The party sits at 4 of them, 1 HP, one of them at 8 HP. They're beat up. They've used all their spell slots. The only thing around them are a bunch of bully ones themselves, and this snake approaching them. They're a level 1 party versus a CR 8 Spirit Naga, and they're all already at 1 HP. It looks grim. There's not much they can do. They all stand there as the snake approaches, waiting to see what happens. And then the session ends. Barely managing to survive that first encounter, they're now faced with almost certain death. For what reasons? Well, I think my players might say something along the lines of, that's unfair. Why are we facing a Spirit Naga at this level? It makes no sense. And my answer to that is, it's not that it's unfair. It most definitely is unfair if you look at it from a linear point of view. You guys cannot beat, most likely, a Spirit Naga. And it'll one-shot you. It'll literally one-shot full-on kill you. But it is fair because Sothis the Everborn roams these lands. He works for another creature, and his job is to hunt down frogmen and kill them. There's a chance of running into him, and so that chance was now. You guys ran into him, and his men and snakes start fighting the frogmen. And there was a chance there where Krokl showed up and was very frantic. They also knew for a fact that I rolled a dice for some reason, which should have been an indicator that something bad would happen. But, maybe that's maybe assumptuous. But all the key signs were there for them to run. The problem is they didn't clean up the fight fast enough, they didn't escape fast enough, and they also got very unlucky. And so, Sothis the Everborn showed up. Now, this could have been completely avoided if they would have asked properly or really, really made sure they knew everything about these swamps that they could get from Aldania and the Grove, they would have known about Sothis, or at least about the Naga and the snake people and their fight against each other. And they would have known that whenever they saw those snakes, they need to run. That they need to run. They need to not wait around. Because once Sothis finds you, you cannot get away. But the players did not know this. The players did not properly learn the dangers of the swamps beforehand. So now the players are having to learn the dangers of the swamps firsthand. And that means they'll probably die. Well, I guess I'll find out next week. Anyway, my name is Fawnde. Thank you for watching this week's DM Diary. I'll see you later.